Hello everyone, I'm Detective Brooks from the Kenton Police Department, Ohio. Today, I'm going to tell you about the case of Amanda Knox, a young American student who found herself at the center of an international scandal. Although I wasn't personally involved in the investigation, I've carefully studied all the materials to share with you what I've learned. This story took place in 2007 in the Italian city of Perugia, where Amanda went as part of a student exchange program. Amanda settled into an apartment with 3 other girls, including British student Meredith Kercher. Initially, everything was going well. Amanda was learning Italian, making new friends, and working at a local bar. She was a typical student who wanted to gain new experiences and enjoy life in another country. But on November 1, 2007, a tragedy occurred that would forever change Amanda's life. Her roommate Meredith was found dead in their shared apartment. The girl was partially undressed, with deep cuts on her neck. It was clear that this was a brutal murder. The police immediately launched an investigation and began searching for possible suspects. Unfortunately, their attention quickly focused on Amanda and her boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito. Investigators found some evidence that, in their opinion, pointed to the couple's involvement in the crime. This was the beginning of a long and complicated case that lasted many years and attracted worldwide attention. Amanda found herself at the center of the scandal and was accused of brutally murdering her friend. Her life turned into a real nightmare. There are many controversial moments and ambiguous facts in this case. Various pieces of evidence were presented, some of which raised doubts about their reliability. Testimonies were often inconsistent and confusing. Public opinion was divided. Some believed in Amanda's guilt, while others considered her an innocent victim. There are still many details and twists ahead in this story. We will learn more about Amanda's personality, the course of the investigation and the trial, the role of the media and the public in this case. We will try to figure out what really happened on that terrible night and whether the verdict was fair. So let's unravel this tangle of mysteries and riddles together, step by step. Perhaps we will be able to find answers to some questions and understand what Amanda Knox's true role was in this tragic story. So, let's learn more about Amanda Knox before she found herself at the center of this high-profile case. Amanda was born on July 9, 1987, in Seattle, Washington, USA. She grew up in an ordinary American family, not particularly standing out from her peers. From childhood, Amanda showed an interest in learning different languages and cultures. She was an active and sociable girl who easily made new acquaintances. At school, Amanda was particularly interested in literature and foreign languages, which later influenced her choice of future profession. After graduating from high school, Amanda entered the University of Washington, where she began studying Italian. It was this fascination with Italian that became one of the main reasons why she decided to go to Italy to study. Amanda devoted her university years not only to studying, but also to actively participating in student life, joining various youth communities and interest groups. In 2007, Knox learned about a student exchange program that allowed her to spend a whole year in Italy. She immediately decided to take this opportunity and chose the city of Perugia as her destination, one of the oldest university centers in Italy, known for its rich history and culture. For a young girl who wanted to improve her knowledge of Italian and immerse herself in an authentic environment, Perugia seemed like the perfect place. Before leaving for Italy, Amanda had already earned a reputation as a diligent student and an active participant in university life. She not only studied well, but also found time for social activities and volunteering. Amanda participated in various student clubs, especially those related to the study of foreign languages and intercultural exchange. Amanda's interest in Italy was not limited to language and literature. She was fascinated by Italian art, cuisine, and traditions. Amanda dreamed of seeing the masterpieces of Italian artists with her own eyes, tasting real pasta and pizza, and communicating with locals. She was confident that a year in Italy would be an unforgettable adventure for her and would help not only improve her language skills, but also better understand herself and the world around her. Unfortunately, fate had completely different plans for Knox. What was supposed to be a year of dreams turned into the worst nightmare of her life. No one, including Amanda herself, could have imagined the ordeals that awaited her in Perugia and how one tragic event would forever change her fate. So this was Amanda Knox before finding herself at the center of the most high-profile criminal case of the decade. An ordinary girl from an ordinary American family who just wanted to study, develop, and explore the world. She had no idea that very soon her name would be on the front pages of all the world's newspapers, but for far from pleasant reasons. In the summer of 2007, she finally arrived in the long-awaited Perugia, a small but incredibly picturesque city in the heart of Umbria. Amanda settled into a cozy apartment that she shared with 3 other girls, including British student Meredith Kercher. Meredith, like Amanda, came to Italy on a student exchange program. It would seem that the 2 young foreigners had a lot in common: young age, love of travel, desire to learn about another culture. At first, the girls got along well, sharing impressions of their new life and making plans for the future. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The first weeks in Perugia were a real fairy tale for Amanda. She immersed herself in the local student life, attending lectures at the university, participating in various events, meeting new people. Amanda continued to improve her Italian not only in classes, but also in live communication with locals. Her energy, openness, and genuine interest in everything new helped her quickly adapt to life in a foreign country. To have her own pocket money, Amanda got a job at the Le Chic Bar, which was owned by Patrick Lumumba, a native of Congo. This job gave her the opportunity not only to earn a little money, but also to delve deeper into the atmosphere of the city and meet different people. It was at this bar that Amanda met her new boyfriend, a young Italian named Raffaele Sollecito. It seemed that everything was going as well as possible. But despite the carefree first months, Knox had to get used to some peculiarities of life in Italy that differed from the American way of life she was used to. A different culture, a different rhythm of life, different rules of the game, all this required some effort and time to adapt. But Amanda, with her curiosity and love of life, gladly accepted these challenges. However, fate was already preparing completely different trials for Amanda. On November 1, 2007, her roommate Meredith Kercher was found brutally murdered in their shared apartment. This tragedy came as a real shock to everyone and completely turned Amanda's life upside down. From a carefree student, she instantly turned into the main suspect in a terrible crime. Thus began a long and complicated story that would define Amanda Knox's fate for years to come and make her name known all over the world. A story full of riddles, contradictions, and unexpected twists. A story about how a dream can turn into a nightmare, and an ordinary life can turn into a courtroom thriller. What really happened on that fatal night? Was Amanda really involved in the murder of her friend? The answers to these questions were sought for many years, and we will return to them more than once. On November 1, 2007, in the apartment in Perugia where Amanda Knox lived with other female students, a terrible tragedy occurred. Meredith Kercher, one of Amanda's roommates, was found dead in her room. Her body was covered with numerous wounds, and deep cuts were visible on her neck, indicating an extremely brutal murder. This shocking event not only stunned the entire student dormitory, but also shook the entire local community. Perugia, known for its calm and safe university town atmosphere, suddenly found itself in the spotlight due to one of the most high-profile crimes in Italian history. The police immediately launched an investigation. The main task of the first days was to reconstruct the picture of events on that fatal night, to understand what exactly happened in the apartment and who could have committed such a brutal murder. Investigators began questioning everyone who was in any way connected with Meredith, primarily her roommates, including Amanda Knox, and very quickly, the attention of the police and the public focused on Amanda. Why? Because some details in her behavior and testimony aroused suspicion. For example, there were certain inconsistencies in her stories about where she was and what she was doing that night. The police were also alerted by Amanda's unusual, in their opinion, reactions to what had happened. In addition to Amanda, her boyfriend, Italian Raffaele Sollecito, also fell under suspicion. Investigators collected some evidence that, in their opinion, pointed to the couple's possible involvement in the crime. In particular, during a search of Raffaele's apartment, a knife was confiscated on which traces of blood were found. And on the bra of the murdered Meredith, experts found Raffaele's DNA. These findings later became some of the key pieces of evidence for the prosecution. However, as it turned out later, the investigation also had significant shortcomings. Many experts criticized the methods of collecting and processing physical evidence, pointing out the possibility of their accidental or intentional contamination during investigative actions. This called into question the reliability and admissibility of some of the evidence. Meanwhile, the case was gaining more and more publicity. A real media frenzy erupted around the investigation. The media around the world began closely following every move of the police, relishing the details and putting forward their own versions of events. Against the backdrop of this unhealthy interest and constant pressure, Amanda and Raffaele found themselves at the center of a real storm that mixed real facts with speculation and rumors. This atmosphere of public hysteria and bias created very difficult conditions for conducting a fair and impartial investigation and trial. And although at that time no one knew how this story would end, it was clear that it would not be an easy walk for any of the participants. Thus, the tragic death of Meredith Kercher marked the beginning of one of the most complicated and controversial criminal cases in modern history, a case that became a real test for the justice system and raised more questions than it gave answers. And although we now know its finale, believe me, the path to the truth was very long and winding. On November 6, 2007, just a few days after the brutal murder of Meredith Kercher, Amanda Knox and her boyfriend Raffaele Sollecito were arrested. This step by the Italian police was the result of the evidence collected, which investigators considered convincing enough to bring charges. Among this evidence were certain discrepancies in the suspects' statements regarding their whereabouts and actions on the night of the murder. The police also referred to some physical evidence found at the crime scene that allegedly pointed to Amanda and Raffaele's involvement in this tragedy. In addition to them, Patrick Lumumba, the owner of the bar where Amanda worked, was also arrested. The reason for his arrest was a mention of him in one of Amanda's first statements. However, she later claimed that she gave this testimony under pressure from the investigators. The case instantly attracted enormous attention from the international community. At the center of this media storm was Amanda Knox, a young American who, in the eyes of the public, turned from a gifted student into the main suspect in a brutal murder. The media dubbed her Foxy Knoxy and began to portray her as a cunning and dangerous person. This biased presentation of information further complicated an already difficult case. The trial began in 2008. Prosecutors presented their version of events. According to their theory, Amanda, Raffaele, and another man, Rudy Ged, a native of Ivory Coast who had already been convicted of this crime in a separate trial, committed the murder of Meredith during some kind of perverted sex game that got out of control. The prosecution relied on physical evidence from the crime scene and the suspect's testimonies, which contained many inconsistencies and strange details. On the other hand, Amanda Knox's lawyers insisted that her initial confessions were obtained under duress, and all the evidence against her was collected in violation of procedure and could have been contaminated during processing. The defense also emphasized that Amanda's DNA was not found on key pieces of physical evidence, such as the murder weapon. In addition, the defense subjected the methods of conducting the investigation and the entire Italian justice system to scathing criticism, claiming numerous violations of the suspect's rights to a fair trial. Meanwhile, the public was divided in its assessments of this complicated case. A significant part of Italian society was inclined to believe in the guilt of Amanda and Raffaele. On the other hand, in the USA, the prevailing opinion was that the young people were being unfairly persecuted and that the real perpetrators of this terrible crime were not the ones on the dock. These contradictory judgments and polarity of opinions created an extremely tense atmosphere around the trial. It seemed that finding the truth in this tangle of mutually exclusive facts and conjectures would be extremely difficult. And although at that moment the finale of this drama was not yet known, it was clear to everyone that a long and exhausting struggle lay ahead for Amanda, Raffaele, and their loved ones. The trial of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito was a real test for the Italian justice system. It took place under the close attention of the world media and was accompanied by fierce public debates. The focus was on the evidence collected by the prosecution, as well as how this evidence was presented and interpreted by prosecutors and lawyers. The prosecution placed particular emphasis on several key elements. Firstly, the presence of Raffaele Sollecito's DNA on the clasp of the murdered Meredith Kercher's bra. Prosecutors argued that this finding was irrefutable proof of Raffaele's presence at the crime scene at the time of the murder. Secondly, the investigation emphasized the mixed DNA samples of Amanda and Meredith found in the bathroom of their shared apartment. These traces, according to the prosecution, indicated that Amanda was present during the attack on Meredith or immediately after it and tried to cover up the traces. Thirdly, the prosecutors painted a rather unflattering psychological portrait of Amanda Knox. They portrayed her as a cold, calculating, and manipulative person. To support this characterization, they cited evidence of Amanda's strange and not entirely adequate behavior in the first days after the murder, her alleged inability to show empathy and emotions that would befit an innocent person in such a tragic situation. On the other hand, Amanda and Raffaele's defense built its strategy on questioning the reliability and admissibility of the collected evidence. Lawyers argued that in the process of collecting and analyzing physical evidence, significant violations were committed that could lead to their accidental or intentional contamination. and this, accordingly, made such evidence unreliable and unsuitable for use in court. Another important argument of the defense was the unreliability of Amanda's initial testimony. Her lawyers claimed that this testimony was obtained as a result of long and exhausting interrogations conducted without the participation of a lawyer and an interpreter. Under such conditions, according to the defenders, Amanda could break down and provide false testimony that did not correspond to reality. In addition, Knox and Sollecito's lawyers drew attention to the absence in the case file of a clear motive that could explain why young people who had no problems with the law suddenly decided to commit such a brutal murder. The defense insisted that the prosecution had failed to provide a convincing answer to this question. It is also important to note the role of the media in this high-profile case. The media closely followed every day of the trial, relishing the smallest details and often taking one side or the other. Some publications openly sympathized with the prosecution, portraying Amanda as a cunning and immoral person. Others, on the contrary, sympathized with the defendants and criticized the actions of the prosecutor's office and the court. Such media bias further fueled passions in society and created additional difficulties for the administration of impartial justice. Thus, the trial of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito turned out to be a real battlefield between the prosecution and the defense, where each side tried to present its version of events and convince the jury of its rightness. This confrontation was accompanied by active media intervention and close public attention, which only increased the tension and drama of the situation. And although at that time no one knew how this story would end, it was clear to everyone that it would not be an easy walk. This decision caused a considerable resonance both in Italy and abroad, especially in the USA, Amanda's homeland. Many Americans were shocked and outraged by this verdict, considering it unfair and biased. In the States, calls began to be made for a review of the case, and Amanda herself turned into almost a symbol of the fight against an imperfect justice system. The case gained not only wide public attention, but also a political coloring. American high-ranking officials, including then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, expressed concern about the fate of their compatriot and called on the Italian authorities to ensure a fair consideration of the appeal. Amanda Knox's story sparked heated debates in Italian society about the state of the criminal justice system, investigative methods, and the problem of the arbitrariness of law enforcement. Many were outraged by how ineptly and tendentiously the police and the prosecutor's office worked, how easily they rejected evidence that did not fit into their version, and how peremptorily they imposed their point of view. For Amanda Knox herself, this story had very serious and dramatic consequences. Even after the final acquittal, it was very difficult for the girl to return to a normal life and get rid of the stigma of a murderer. Her name will forever remain inextricably linked with this high-profile and controversial case. In order to somehow mitigate the negative consequences of what happened, Amanda wrote an autobiographical book and also actively got involved in the work of organizations that help people who have been unjustly convicted or accused of serious crimes. She seeks to draw society's attention to the problems of miscarriages of justice and investigative arbitrariness, warning that anyone can end up behind bars due to an imperfect system. One of the most striking aspects of the Amanda Knox case was the unprecedented media coverage it received. It seemed that the whole world, with bated breath, was following every twist and turn of this detective story. Particularly close attention was paid to the figure of Amanda herself, a young American woman who found herself at the epicenter of this storm. It must be admitted that the media played an extremely ambiguous role in this story. On the one hand, they performed their usual function informing the public about the course of events. But on the other hand, in pursuit of sensationalism and ratings, many media outlets openly speculated on this topic, fueling hysteria and stirring up emotions. The tabloids, both Italian and British, were especially zealous. They quickly stuck the label Foxy Knoxy on Amanda, hinting at her alleged cunning and ability to manipulate people. This image of a sexually liberated, immoral American woman was firmly entrenched in the mass consciousness and undoubtedly greatly harmed Amanda. In general, the media often exploited clichés and stereotypes, contrasting depraved American culture with traditional values of Italian society. Amanda was portrayed as the embodiment of all the vices of modern youth: selfishness, irresponsibility, promiscuity. And Italian justice, accordingly, looked like a bastion of morality and order. Of course, such pressure from the media could not but affect the atmosphere around the trial. It created additional pressure on judges and jurors, because everyone understood that millions of eyes were closely watching their every word and gesture. In such conditions, it was extremely difficult to remain impartial and objective. public opinion on the case was divided. In Italy, many were inclined to the version of Amanda and Raffaele's guilt, believing that the 2009 verdict restored justice. They say the arrogant American was quite rightly punished for a terrible crime. On the other hand, in the United States, sympathies for Amanda prevailed. Most Americans were convinced that their compatriot had become a victim of a biased and incompetent investigation, that she was convicted on the basis of circumstantial evidence and speculation. It is not surprising that the Knox case quickly acquired a political coloring. And although Amanda and Raffaele were eventually acquitted, this story had serious and long-term consequences. In particular, it forced the Italian authorities to think about the need for reforms in the criminal justice system. After all, it became obvious that the current procedures for collecting and evaluating evidence are far from perfect, and the rights of suspects and accused are often violated. At the same time, the Knox case gave impetus to a discussion about ethical standards in journalism. Many experts pointed out the unacceptability of such irresponsible and biased coverage of high-profile criminal cases. After all, media pressure and whipping up hysteria seriously affect public sentiment and can push the court to make politically motivated decisions. One cannot fail to mention the cultural impact of the Amanda Knox case. Based on these events, many books were written, several documentaries and feature films were made. Each such work offered its own interpretation of what happened, placed its own accents, and evaluated the characters in its own way. In general, this story left a deep mark on the collective memory and continues to influence the image of Italy, especially in terms of the impartiality and professionalism of its justice system. There is no doubt that interest in the Amanda Knox case will not fade for many years to come, because it has become the embodiment of the eternal human drama, the clash of good and evil, truth and falsehood, justice and prejudice. In December 2009, an Italian court found Amanda Knox and her then-boyfriend Raffaele Sollecito guilty of the murder of British student Meredith Kercher. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years in prison, Raffaele to 25 years. It would seem that a line had been drawn under this high-profile case. But in reality, everything was just beginning. The fact is that the verdict caused considerable indignation and protests both in Italy and abroad, especially in the United States. Many believed that the court was biased and the evidence unconvincing and contradictory. Under pressure from the public and the efforts of the defense team, a retrial was scheduled in 2010. And in 2013, what supporters of Amanda and Raffaele had been waiting for so long happened. The appellate court heeded the arguments of the defense and agreed to reconsider the key evidence in the case. In particular, independent experts were called in who seriously questioned the reliability and admissibility of some of the physical evidence presented by the prosecution. It turned out that in the collection and storage of this evidence, significant violations were committed that could lead to their accidental or deliberate contamination. That is, it could not be said with certainty that, for example, the DNA of the suspects on certain items got there precisely during the commission of the crime and not got there through the negligence of the investigators. This expert testimony was decisive. In October 2011, the appellate court overturned the conviction and declared Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito not guilty of the murder of Meredith Kercher. They were immediately released from custody, and Amanda was finally able to return home to Seattle. But even with that, the case did not end. The prosecution appealed the decision of the appellate court to the Supreme Court of Cassation of Italy, and in March 2013, this court unexpectedly overturned the acquittal and ordered a retrial. This turn of events shocked many and caused a new surge of public outrage. However, during the new appellate process in 2014, the prosecution again failed to provide compelling evidence of Amanda and Raffaele's guilt. Finally, in March 2015, the Italian Supreme Court upheld their final acquittal and closed the case. This time forever. After all these dramatic events, Amanda Knox returned to the United States and tried to start a new life. However, as you can imagine, it was very difficult for her to do this. She will forever remain a person whose name is inextricably linked with one of the loudest and most controversial trials of our time. Knox did not hide from this burden. On the contrary, she decided to use her experience and popularity to draw attention to the problems of the criminal justice system. She began to actively advocate for reforms, give interviews, and write books. Her case has become a kind of symbol of a miscarriage of justice and a call for greater caution and responsibility in the investigation and consideration of criminal cases. In general, this story left us with many lessons. It showed how important it is to strictly adhere to procedural norms when collecting and using evidence, how powerful and dangerous the influence of the media and public opinion on the course of a trial can be, and how difficult it is to correct a miscarriage of justice if it has already occurred. The Amanda Knox case will forever go down in history as an example that even the loudest and seemingly obvious accusations can sometimes turn out to be false, and that the right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence must be reliably protected under any circumstances. Thus, in March 2015, the Italian Supreme Court put an end to this long and complicated story, confirming the innocence of Amanda and her former boyfriend Raffaele Sollecito. For Knox, this meant not only long-awaited freedom, but also the opportunity to finally return home to the United States and try to start all over again. It is clear that after everything she experienced, it was very difficult. At home, Amanda was greeted as a heroine and a victim of injustice. But at the same time, she immediately found herself at the center of the frenzied attention of the public and the press. Her every step, her every word immediately became public and the subject of endless discussions. Amanda did not hide from this attention. She understood that her story could become a powerful tool for change. Therefore, she actively got involved in public activities, trying to draw attention to the problems of the judicial system and the unfair treatment of the accused. Knox began speaking at various public events, talking about her experience and highlighting the shortcomings of Italian justice. She also addressed student audiences at universities, discussing with young people such important topics as the presumption of innocence, human rights, and the role of the media in trials. In addition, Amanda decided to tell her story in a memoir book titled Waiting to be Heard. This very frank and emotional book became a bestseller and helped many people better understand what this young woman had to go through. Amanda also found herself in journalism. She began writing articles on judicial topics and even making documentaries about people who have become victims of miscarriages of justice and unjust accusations. Her own experience helped her become very convincing and insightful in this role. Of course, all these years Amanda had to fight the psychological consequences of the trauma she experienced. Condemnation, harassment, imprisonment, all this could not but affect her mental state. But the girl showed incredible strength of spirit and love of life. Despite everything, she managed to maintain faith in herself and in people. Gradually, Amanda's life began to improve. She found her love and married her longtime friend Christopher Robinson. The couple settled on Vashon Island in Washington State, where Amanda was finally able to find the long-awaited peace and solitude. But Amanda could no longer and did not want to completely leave her story behind. She continued to actively engage in human rights activities, speak out against unjust accusations and sentences, fight against bias and manipulation in the media. Her goal is to ensure that no innocent person ends up behind bars due to someone's negligence, bias, or malicious intent. In general, the story of Amanda Knox is a story about incredible human resilience, strength of spirit, and faith. It shows that even in the darkest of times, one must not give up and give in. That truth always triumphs in the end if you fight for it tirelessly. And that even from the most terrible trials, you can come out with your head held high. Today, Amanda Knox is not just a symbol of judicial injustice, but also the embodiment of hope and the indomitability of the human spirit. Her story reminds us that sometimes you have to pay a very high price for freedom and dignity, but it's always worth it. The Knox case exposed many problems in the international justice system and forced many to think about the need for reforms. In particular, it showed how important it is to ensure that suspects and accused persons have the right to a fair trial, especially when it comes to foreigners. No less acute was the issue of providing consular assistance to citizens who find themselves under investigation or trial abroad. It became obvious that in such cases, support from the native state can be simply invaluable. The Amanda Knox case also forced lawmakers in many countries to reconsider their norms regarding extradition, collection, and evaluation of evidence, and the admissibility of testimony obtained under pressure. It became clear to everyone, in order to avoid a repeat of such mistakes, changes are needed at the systemic level. No less significant was the cultural impact of this story. The Knox case became an inexhaustible source of creativity in a wide variety of genres from documentary to fiction. Books, films, TV shows dedicated to these events can be listed for a very long time. At the same time, each such work offered its own perspective, its own interpretation, its own accents. Someone focused on the detective intrigue, someone on the personal drama, someone on the social and political context. But all these works, in one way or another, contributed to the fact that the Amanda Knox case firmly entered the collective memory of mankind. Her story has become a kind of cultural phenomenon that has united millions of people around the world. It made us think about the eternal questions of truth and falsehood, justice and prejudice, conscience and responsibility. And although everyone has their own answers to these questions, asking them is already invaluable. It is especially important that the Amanda Knox case attracted huge media attention. Leading publications, TV channels, and internet portals followed every twist of this plot for years, relishing the details and putting forward their own versions. On the one hand, this allowed millions of people to keep abreast of events. But on the other hand, it gave rise to a lot of speculation, conjectures, and outright lies. But in addition to journalists, this case was actively discussed and studied by experts in criminal law, forensic psychology, and criminology. It has become a kind of encyclopedia of typical mistakes and miscalculations that are often made during investigations and trials. It is used in educational programs of law and police schools to teach future law enforcement officers to avoid similar blunders. So, the legacy of the Amanda Knox case turned out to be truly immeasurable. It touched almost all aspects of our life, from jurisprudence and politics to art and everyday life. It once again proved that the struggle for truth and justice is never in vain, no matter how difficult and hopeless it may seem. This story will undoubtedly remain forever in the annals of criminal justice as an example that even the most complicated and controversial cases can be solved if you do not spare any effort or time for this, and that every person, regardless of status and circumstances, has an inalienable right to a fair and impartial trial.